The invitation came on a Wednesday afternoon tucked at the bottom of an email thread I almost deleted. "Hey mom, it would be great if you came to the family barbecue this Sunday at the Whitaker place. Starts at 2. Dress nice." No call, no warm greeting. No mention of how I'd been or how she missed me. Just a short message like I was some distant acquaintance, a formality on the guest list. Still, I stared at the screen for a long time. Tessa hadn't invited me to anything in months. Ever since she got engaged to Nolan Whitaker, the calls had stopped, the texts dried up, and suddenly my daughter became a carefully curated version of herself I didn't recognize. But this invite, however last minute and impersonal, felt like a crack in the wall she'd built. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe this was her trying in her way, so I typed back, "Thank you, I'll be there." Sunday morning arrived warm and clear. I spent longer than usual getting ready, pulling my hair back the way Tessa used to like it when she was little and choosing the pale blue dress I saved for special occasions. It wasn't designer, but it fit well and didn't show my age as much as the others. The Whitaker estate was in Weston, tucked behind tall hedges and guarded by an iron gate that creaked open as I approached. My car, a 10-year-old Toyota Corolla, looked painfully out of place between the rows of gleaming black SUVs and polished European sedans. I parked along the far end of the drive and stepped out, heels clicking softly on the stone walkway. Everything smelled like wealth. I followed the sounds of music and laughter around to the backyard where round tables dressed in white linen were set beneath canopies. Crystal glasses sparkled in the sun, and servers in matching polo shirts carried trays of rosé and finger foods. It was like walking into a magazine spread. I spotted Tessa across the lawn, standing beside Nolan in a pale yellow sundress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her long hair fell in soft waves, her makeup immaculate. She was laughing at something a woman beside her said, holding a wine glass like she'd been born into it. I stood at the edge of the lawn for a moment, unsure where to go. No one noticed me. A man brushed past, glancing at my shoes, then away. Two women nearby were discussing someone's wedding registry, and one of them wrinkled her nose in my direction before turning her back. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, offering polite nods to strangers who looked right through me. Evelyn Whitaker found me before Tessa did. She approached with a glass of white wine in hand and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Eleanor, how lovely you could join us." "Thank you for having me," I said. "I'm so glad you received the message." Evelyn added, tilting her head, "Message from Tessa. She wasn't sure if you'd be free." I nodded slowly. "I wasn't sure either." Evelyn's smile tightened. She looked me over quickly, her eyes landing on my dress, my purse, the modest necklace I'd worn since Tessa's high school graduation. "Well, you look comfortable." I chose not to respond. She sipped her wine and gestured loosely toward the crowd. Family gatherings can be a little overwhelming at first, but once you find your place, it all falls into rhythm. Find my place. That line stuck with me as she walked away, already greeting someone else with a warmer smile. I wandered toward the buffet table, taking a small plate of grilled vegetables and roasted chicken, though I had no appetite. I scanned the lawn looking for Tessa again, trying to catch her eye. She didn't look for me. Eventually Nolan noticed me and gave a polite wave. Tessa turned. Her eyes met mine for the briefest second, then flicked away. She whispered something to Nolan, and they both started walking toward me. My fingers tightened around the plate. "Here we go." Tessa smiled in that polite, hollow way she'd perfected over the last year. "Mom, you made it." "That's great," I managed a smile. "I wouldn't miss it." She looked me up and down, and I caught the flicker of disapproval before she could hide it. "You look nice." "Thank you." Nolan chimed in cheerfully. "Glad you're here, Eleanor. We were hoping to talk to you about something, actually." "Oh," he glanced around. "Maybe somewhere quieter." I followed them across the yard, past a row of blooming hydrangeas and down a stone path that led to a side patio shaded by a pergola. It was cooler here, removed from the laughter and clinking glasses. Nolan took a breath and launched right in. "So, the wedding planning's going well, but as you can imagine, things are getting expensive." Tessa shifted beside him, her arms folded. "Very expensive. We've covered most of it." Nolan continued, but there's a final piece we need help with. A pause. $60,000. My ears rang. Sorry, he smiled as if he'd just asked for a ride to the airport. 60,000. It's for the venue deposit, the dress fittings, catering upgrades, appearances matter in our circle. Tessa added without looking at me. We're trying to keep everything tasteful, elegant. I stared at them. I don't have that kind of money. Nolan's smile didn't falter, but there was steel in his eyes. Now we understand. But if it's not something you can contribute to, it might be best to step back. Step back. Tessa's voice was quieter, but just as cold. It's not personal, Mom. It's about the image, the guest list, who belongs where. She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't have to. I set my untouched plate on the stone railing and straightened up. I see Tessa hesitated. Of course, we'd still like to have you involved in small ways, maybe the rehearsal dinner or just a quick hello before the ceremony. I nodded slowly. Thank you for including me. Nolan gave another pleasant smile. Of course, I excused myself, walking back down the path with steady steps. The laughter resumed behind me. But something in me had gone very, very quiet. The sun filtered through the pergola slats, casting neat rectangles of shadow across the stone floor as I walked away. The sounds of the barbecue grew distant, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves and the quiet thud of my heels on the path. I should have kept going straight to the car, but something made me stop just around the corner. I leaned against the side wall of the house, letting my hands rest flat against the cool brick, eyes closed, breath steady. I needed a moment. Just a moment. But the moment didn't last. Footsteps followed. Measured. Intentional. Eleanor. Nolan's voice, polite, expectant, as if nothing unusual had just taken place. Would you mind coming inside for a minute? There's something else we'd like to discuss. I opened my eyes. Tessa stood behind him, her face unreadable. She didn't meet my gaze. Of course, I said. Why not? He led the way through a side entrance and into a private sitting room near the rear of the house. It was immaculately decorated in cream and navy, a polished wood coffee table centered between two white leather chairs and a matching love seat. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out onto the manicured lawn where the rest of the party laughed and drank under the New England sky. Nolan gestured toward the love seat. Please sit. I lowered myself onto the edge of the cushion, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Tessa remained standing, her arms crossed. Nolan took the seat across from me and rested one ankle casually over his knee like a man about to deliver a sales pitch. We want to be direct with you, Eleanor, he said calmly. No dancing around things. That's appreciated, I replied, though my voice sounded distant in my own ears. You've always been supportive of Tessa's dreams. Her education, her business. Everything. And we're grateful. Tessa shifted at that, eyes flickering briefly in my direction before looking away again. But weddings, Nolan continued, are not cheap. Especially not the kind expected when your last name is Whitaker and half your guests are from Boston's investment circles. He let that hang in the air. So, we're asking for your help to make it all happen. I waited. He didn't elaborate. My mouth felt dry. How much help are we talking about? $60,000, I blinked. Nolan smiled gently as if he were offering me a choice of appetizers. That covers the venue, catering, upgrades, designer fittings, and a few crucial aesthetics. It's what makes the difference between elegant and forgettable. And, frankly, it's a matter of presentation. People talk. They judge. 60,000, I repeated, making sure I'd heard him right. Tessa finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. It's not that much when you think about what's at stake. Reputation matters. First impressions. We've already covered a lot, but this completes the picture. I stared at my daughter. She used to beg me to read the same bedtime story 3 times in a row. She once cried when I forgot to pack her favorite fruit snacks for 2nd grade. Now she stood before me like a PR executive managing damage control. I don't have that kind of money, I said, voice calm. Nolan didn't flinch. That's unfortunate, because it's not just about the money. It's about showing that you belong here. That you're invested in this family's future. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. Of course, if that's not possible. There's another path. One with less visibility. Less involvement. Tessa turned toward the window. She didn't stop him. You could step back, quietly. Maybe spend some time somewhere comfortable. There are excellent retirement communities out west. Arizona's lovely, peaceful. Retirement communities? I laughed once, a short exhale through my nose. It wasn't humor, it was disbelief. Nolan held my gaze. His expression never changed. We're not saying you're not welcome, just that this is a very curated event. Expectations are high, we're managing image and logistics. And frankly, there's already some concern about. He hesitated, choosing his words with care. Optics. Tessa still hadn't looked at me. You mean the optics of having a mother who waited tables for 20 years, Eleanor? Tessa said softly. The optics of a woman who used her retirement fund to launch your career. Mom, don't. A woman who worked nights and weekends so you could have a shot at the life you're living now. That's not fair. No, I said it isn't. Silence stretched. Nolan cleared his throat. Look, we're trying to give you an option here. To be part of this the right way. But we need to move forward, with or without your support. Tessa turned finally. Her eyes were dry, her face composed. I love you, Mom. I always will. But this is the real world. And sometimes love isn't enough. That was the moment. The click. Not loud or sudden. Just final. I stood up slowly, smoothed the skirt of my dress. Picked up my purse. Thank you, I said. For the clarity. Tessa looked down. I walked toward the door, back through the side hall out into the sun. The breeze had picked up, rattling the edges of the canopy. Laughter drifted from the yard. Someone called for another round of drinks. Everything looked the same. But it wasn't. Something inside me had shifted. Not broken, not even bruised. Just released. I drove the long way home. Not because of traffic, not even to think really. It just felt wrong to return straight from that kind of silence into the narrow kitchen of my Newton apartment, where the walls were too thin and the clock over the stove ticked too loud when the room was still. The air was cooler along the river road, and I rolled down the windows to let it sting my face a little. The wind tangled my hair and dried the sweat on the back of my neck, and for a few minutes I let my mind go blank. Not numb, just empty. No music, no phone, no tears. But when the light turned red at the corner near Watertown Square, it caught up with me. The memory of her voice. I love you, Mom. But this is the real world. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles turned white. The real world. I had seen more of the real world than she could imagine. It came back in pieces as I pulled into the parking lot of my building and sat staring at the brick facade. The rain that night. The sound of Russell's boots pacing our apartment. The crack of glass shattering against the kitchen tile. The tiny whimper from the hallway where Tessa stood frozen in her footy pajamas, clutching her stuffed elephant like it could protect her from the things she didn't yet have words for. That was the night I stopped waiting for things to change. I had bruises blooming across my ribs and a fat lip that stung when I moved, but I packed anyway. Quiet, focused. Tessa was only 4, but she didn't ask questions. She just wrapped her arms around my neck when I lifted her from bed, her body instinctively curling into mine like she knew I was about to carry her out of the life we'd known. Are we going on a trip, Mommy? She'd whispered. Yes, baby. The biggest trip of all. We left everything behind. I had $232 in cash, a nearly maxed out credit card I kept hidden, and a bag with one change of clothes, each a toothbrush and a battered copy of Charlotte's Web where I'd hidden small bills between the boss pages for months. I never thought I'd actually need to use it. We rode the Greyhound overnight to Worcester, where my old roommate from community college had said we could crash for a few days. She had 2 kids and a basement she was too embarrassed to show anyone else, but she opened it to me like it was a palace. From there, it was a series of small, tired steps. A room above a garage that smelled like mildew. A job at a diner where I burned my hands on greasy plates and learned how to smile without meaning it. Tessa started kindergarten in a donated coat with a broken zipper, and I learned how to fix things with a safety pin and a firm voice. We never had enough, but I made it feel like we did. I cut the crusts off her sandwiches, folded her socks into little animals, made birthday cakes from dollar mix and frosting we colored with food dye because it made her laugh. I worked nights at a dental clinic answering phones and cleaning instruments until my legs shook on the walk home. Sometimes I'd fall asleep in my clothes and wake up in time to make her pancakes in the morning before first grade, and I remember the promise I made. One night, sitting on the edge of our pull-out couch with her lying next to me, her head on my arm, I whispered it so quietly I wasn't sure if I'd said it aloud or just to myself. "You will have the life I never had." She believed me. She believed me so much that she carried that hope like armor through every awkward year, every school project, every spelling bee. And I kept giving. I took on extra shifts. I learned how to coupon. I smiled through every PTA meeting where the other moms wore yoga pants that cost more than my grocery bill. When Tessa got into Northeastern, I cried on the bathroom floor because I didn't know how I'd make it work. She got a partial scholarship, but the rest fell on me. I pulled from my retirement fund quietly at first. Then, not so quietly. I told myself it was an investment. Not in the future, not even in her success. In her freedom. Her chance to live without fear. That year, I gave up my car and walked to work through 2 feet of snow some days. She never knew. I didn't want her to. Then came the boutique. She called crying with joy about a storefront in Beacon Hill. A hidden gem. Natural light exposed brick foot traffic from young professionals. She had a vision, she said. Workwear for women who wanted to look powerful without sacrificing style. She'd already picked out suppliers, colors, even had a logo in mind. All she needed was backing. Just until the first few months stabilized. She asked for $97,000. I drained everything I had left. My friend Monica helped draw up the papers to make sure I wasn't just handing it away. She made sure I held 51% of the business legally. Not because I asked for it, because she knew what it had cost me. The shop opened quietly. We celebrated with sparkling apple cider in plastic cups. I watched Tessa glow as she arranged the window display for the first time. I came in after hours to restock steam clothes, clean the bathroom no customer would ever see. She never asked. I just did it. I never asked for thanks. Not even credit. But I thought naively that some part of her still remembered. That somewhere beneath the polished surface and curated Instagram posts and carefully worded interviews my daughter knew who stood behind her. That illusion shattered when I heard her say the words out loud in a podcast clip someone forwarded me last winter. I built this brand from scratch. No handouts, just grit and hustle. I watched the video alone in my kitchen holding a sponge I hadn't rinsed, the sink still running. No handouts. I had been erased. Not forgotten, not overlooked. Erased. And today in that sunlit room behind $1 million house she finished the job. All I had ever done was love her. And now she'd asked me to disappear. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table until sunrise, the same table where I used to help Tessa with homework, where we once shared spaghetti on paper plates the day after moving into that apartment. My hands rested on the smooth surface, still marked by faint pen scratches and one water stain that never quite faded. I stared at nothing in particular, letting the silence speak louder than my thoughts. By 7:30, I was on the phone with Monica. She picked up on the first ring. "I need to see the boutique's quarterly reports," I said. "All of them. The last 18 months. Her voice sharpened. "Is something wrong? Just get them for me." She didn't ask more. She knew better than anyone what silence from me really meant. I met her that afternoon at her office in Cambridge. Her workspace smelled faintly of lavender and coffee, with piles of organized files and legal texts neatly lining the built-in shelves. Monica was always meticulous, not just because of her job, but because she'd learned early in life how fast order could unravel. She handed me a slim manila folder, her eyebrows drawn low. "I flagged a few line items for you. Transfers to a holding account I didn't recognize at first, but the name kept showing up. WRI Capital Fund." My stomach tightened. WRI Whitaker Real Investments. It wasn't official, not in the press. But I had heard Nolan mention it during a fundraiser speech last fall. A side project he'd been courting investors for some new real estate push in South Boston. High risk, high reward. The kind of thing you pitch over cocktails and finish in court. I flipped through the reports. 3 separate transfers, not small. 20,000 the first time, then 15, then another 25, 60,000 in total. Pulled from boutique reserves. Labeled as business consulting fees. My name wasn't on the approvals, but Tessa's signature was. She had used company funds to bankroll her fiancé's project. Funds from a business I still legally owned. My chest felt tight, but I kept turning the pages. A contract dated 2 months earlier. An agreement to restructure the boutique's ownership model after the wedding. A proposed dilution of existing shares in favor of new investors. Once finalized, my majority stake would become a silent interest. 49% with no voting rights. Monica sat across from me watching. "This is the plan they're working on," she said quietly. "You were never supposed to see it." I closed the folder. "They're not just cutting me out of the wedding," I said. "They're cutting me out of everything." We sat in silence for a long moment. "She didn't forget you, Ellie," Monica finally said. "She erased you. That takes effort." I nodded, still staring at the folder. "Have you seen the latest interview?" she asked. "No." She opened her laptop and clicked through a few tabs, then turned the screen toward me. It was a video clip from a podcast I didn't recognize. The host, a woman in her 30s with bright lipstick and a trendy haircut, was beaming. "Tell us how you built this brand from the ground up." Tessa smiled at the camera. "Polished, effortless. No investors, no shortcuts, just grit and a vision. I started this boutique with a few savings and a dream. Every choice was mine, every risk mine too, and I'm proud of that. I didn't hear the rest, I didn't need to. The narrative was clear. I had been removed not only from her future, but from her past. When the video ended, I sat back in the chair, pressing my fingertips together. She wanted the story to be clean. Heroic. And a mother scraping grease off plates and counting coupons didn't fit the brand. Monica leaned forward. "What are you going to do?" I took a breath. "I'm not sure yet. But I'm done pretending this is just about feelings. This is about ownership, legally and otherwise." She nodded, already reaching for another folder. "Then we'll prepare both." I looked up. Both: one for the boutique's legal structure. Audit, financial review, shareholder protections. All by the book. "The second for you. In case this escalates." "It will," I said quietly. "You know it will. Then we'll be ready." I left her office with a flash drive in my purse and something new settling in my bones. It wasn't rage, it wasn't grief, it was clarity. Later that night, I poured a glass of water and sat on the edge of my bed. I thought about the first time Tessa stood on a chair in our old kitchen to show me the logo she'd sketched on the back of a grocery receipt. She had colored it with highlighters and added tiny stars around the name. She'd looked so proud. That girl was gone now. Replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone who smiled for cameras and forgot the hands that carried her there. I set the glass down and turned off the light. She didn't forget. She chose. The next morning, Monica showed up at my door with a box of files, 2 coffees, and a look that told me she hadn't slept either. She set everything down on my kitchen table, swept aside a stack of unopened mail with the back of her hand, and pulled out the familiar manila folder that now felt heavier every time I saw it. "You ready?" she asked, handing me the stronger of the 2 coffees. I nodded. I was. We spent the next hour going over the original incorporation documents for the boutique. It was all there just as she'd set up nearly 3 years ago, when Tessa had been too excited to notice the fine print. Or maybe she had noticed and just assumed I'd never use it. "You still hold 51%, Monica said, tapping the number with the end of her pen. "Because you never signed off on the restructuring she drafted last year. Probably forgot to mention that when she sent you those thank you flowers for the holiday season." She flipped to the next tab. "This here is the proposed adjustment Nolan pushed through with the advisory team. He's trying to pull in 2 new investors, both tied to one of his real estate holding groups. Once those shares dilute your stake, the boutique becomes a vessel. On paper, it still looks like a clothing business, but the money flows somewhere else. I stared at the chart of percentages, arrows, and shareholder notes. It looked more like a maze than a balance sheet. A maze they thought I'd never bother to read. "When is this supposed to happen?" I asked. Monica frowned. "Based on the emails I intercepted right after the wedding. Tessa signs a resolution, they introduce the new board members, and you get pushed into a non-voting position. Silent ownership." I looked down at the bottom corner of the document where my name still sat as majority owner. How legal is that? It's shady, but not illegal if they get your signature. The goal is to get you to walk away or agree under pressure. But until that happens, this whole thing rests on whether or not you act before the wedding. She leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing. "They're assuming you won't. That's their weak spot. They think you're tired, hurt, disconnected. They've built a structure around the belief that you won't fight." I didn't respond. My mind was moving fast now, not in panic, but with something colder, sharper. The pieces fit too well. The money transfers. The sudden push for the 60,000. The timing of the wedding. The interview where I'd been cut out like a stain. Everything about it screamed design. Monica watched me closely. "You don't have to fight, I know you. You've carried enough already. But if you want to, we can start laying the groundwork now. Quietly. Just in case." I sipped the coffee, staring out the window above my sink where the early light hit the glass just right, throwing a soft gold over the counter. I could almost hear Tessa's little voice from 20 years ago. "Mommy, why does the sun only shine on our kitchen in the morning?" "Because that's when it remembers us," I'd told her. Monica stood and pulled a small envelope from her bag. I drafted a motion to freeze business assets pending audit. "It's a formality for now. Just a safety net. But once you sign, we can move forward if things escalate." She placed it on the table in front of me. Her hand lingered there for a second, then pulled back. No pressure. I didn't touch it. I just kept looking out the window past the trees to where the sunlight caught on the street. They had worked so hard to make me invisible. So hard to edit me out of their narrative. But here I was in every line of that contract. In every dollar that funded that boutique. In every sleepless night that built the foundation of their success. They'd counted on my silence. On my love. They hadn't counted on my memory. I turned back to Monica. "Not yet," I said. "Let them believe they still have the upper hand. Just until I'm ready." She nodded slowly. "But you're not saying no number." "I'm not saying no." She packed up the files with care, tucking the envelope back into her briefcase like it was a sleeping animal. When she left, I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching the street where the sun still poured across the asphalt like warm honey. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't mind. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't frozen in grief. I was calculating. Under the dull hum of my kitchen ceiling fan, I reached for my notebook. The old black one, frayed at the corners, tucked behind my electric bill pile. I opened to a fresh page and wrote 3 names across the top in block letters: Tessa, Nolan, me. Then under each I started making notes. What they knew, what they wanted, what they thought I wouldn't notice. Tessa believed I'd stay quiet because I always had. That I'd support her from the background like a retired stagehand behind a velvet curtain. Nolan believed I didn't understand the mechanics, that I wouldn't see the pattern in the paper trail, the diversion of funds, the slow bleed of control. They were both wrong. It was nearly midnight when I finally picked up the phone. Not to call Monica yet. I wasn't ready for that step, not until I gave my daughter one last chance to tell me the truth. She answered on the second ring. "Hi Mom." "Hi sweetie. I didn't wake you, did I?" "Number. Just winding down. Final fittings tomorrow. Cake tasting. Seating drama. You know how it goes." I waited a beat. I didn't smile. "I know you're busy. I just wanted to ask something. Just one thing." "Okay, is there anything I need to know before your wedding?" Silence. "I mean business related," I added. "Financial. Legal." Another pause. "Mom," her voice shifted. Less daughter, more diplomat. "You really don't need to worry about all that. Everything's handled. Just enjoy the day when it comes. Enjoy the day." I pressed the phone harder to my ear. You used to tell me everything. Tessa sighed. That was a long time ago. Not so long. There's nothing to worry about, she said again, more firmly this time. I'll explain everything after the wedding. Once the dust settles. Tessa, I have to go. I've got a spreadsheet open and 3 unanswered emails. Love you. She hung up before I could respond. I stared at the screen for a full minute before lowering the phone to the table. Then I stood across the room and opened the bottom drawer of my bedroom dresser. Inside was a narrow file envelope unlabeled. I slid it out carefully and placed it beside the lamp. Inside were the original boutique registration documents, a photocopy of the operating agreement, Monica's summary notes, and the power of attorney form she'd drawn up years ago just in case Tessa ever fell seriously ill or incapacitated. It was the kind of form you forget exists until the day you need it. I ran my fingers over the typewritten lines. The ink had faded slightly, but the clauses were still clear. Silent majority shareholder. Right to audit. Authority to freeze accounts with cause. They had written me out emotionally, but not legally. I didn't sleep. I sat up most of the night rereading every clause, every margin note Monica had scribbled in pencil. Her handwriting was tight and confident, looping back only when something needed clarification. I highlighted the trigger clause twice. The clause that gave me the power to halt all boutique operations if fiduciary misconduct was suspected. By 5 a.m., I had made my decision. I picked up my phone and typed the message to Monica. Time to proceed. It took her less than a minute to respond. Understood. Files in motion. Confirming timestamps now. Legal notice ready by noon. Are you okay? I will be. By 7, she sent over the finalized notice for my review. Legal language always looked cold on paper. Dispassionate. But I could hear Monica's voice in every line. She had written this to be clean, ironclad, impossible to stall or undo. Freezing of business accounts and assets pending a full audit. Notice of conflict of interest and potential misappropriation of funds. Temporary suspension of board activity. Everything was in place. The fuse was lit. But the explosion would wait. I still had time to breathe before it all unraveled. I made myself coffee stronger than usual and stood at the kitchen sink watching the world outside begin its routine. Neighbors stepping out with their dogs. A jogger with headphones bouncing in rhythm. The paper delivery van nudging past the curb. All of them unaware that today I'd pressed a quiet button that would change everything. Later, I opened my laptop and did something I hadn't done in months. I typed my daughter's name into a search bar and clicked on the most recent interview she had given just last week with a local business magazine. Tessa Maddox redefining women's fashion and ownership. The headline sat smugly atop a glossy photo of her in a navy jumpsuit, arms crossed, the boutique seasonal window display behind her. I clicked play. The interviewer leaned in with a warm smile. Tell us what inspired you to create Maddox & Company. What gave you the confidence to take that leap? Tessa smiled with practiced ease. It came from years of observing the gap in the market. I saw working women struggle to find professional clothing that felt empowering. I knew I could do better. So I built something from scratch. No outside investors. Just me and a vision. No outside investors. I paused the video. Her voice still rang in my ears. All warmth and polish. The voice of someone telling a new story, clean and well-lit, where struggle was a footnote and sacrifice didn't belong. She wasn't just surviving without me, she was reinventing herself at my expense. My love had become her launchpad, and now she'd pulled it away like it never existed. I folded the laptop shut. The sun had shifted slightly, pouring light across the floorboards. In the silence, I felt no panic. No dread. Only something deeper. I had not been pushed aside, I had been replaced. But the thing about replacements is they only work if the original stays gone, and I was still here. By midday, Monica had turned her apartment into a command post. Legal pads covered her dining table, marked up spreadsheets lined the wall behind her printer, and a steady stream of emails pinged across her laptop as she coordinated with 2 associates from her firm. Each of them worked in quiet bursts, eyes fixed, voices low and focused. I stood in the corner of the room, watching it all unfold. They weren't dramatic, these women. They didn't talk like courtroom television characters or wave documents in the air. But every movement was decisive. Every word meant something. They were preparing not for war but for precision. Monica handed me a folder labeled Final Delivery. Here are the audit notifications. Boutique account freeze. Asset protection clause. Shareholder breach documentation. Everything is timestamped, certified, and bound by our original agreement. I opened the folder. 8 envelopes sat inside, addressed individually. Tessa. Nolan. 2 silent investors. 1 boutique vendor Monica suspected had been used to funnel payments, and surprisingly, Nolan's father and older brother both listed as silent partners in the real estate venture where the boutique's funds had vanished. They'll each receive their envelope in person, Monica said. I've arranged it all. Sunday, at the barbecue. You sure that's the best place? I asked, though I already knew the answer. It's where everyone will be. No hiding, no delay. The moment is already built. We're just shifting its purpose. I nodded and sat down at her table. I pulled the envelopes toward me and rested my hand on the one with my daughter's name. I need to add something to hers. She hesitated. Are you sure? Yes. Monica handed me a blank sheet of stationery. Heavy stock, cream-colored, no logo, just clean. I held the pen in my hand for a long time before writing. Tessa, this is not an act of vengeance. This is not about pride or punishment. This is about the truth. I built something with love. You turned it into something else. I don't seek to destroy what we made. I seek to correct the story. You may not understand today, but one day I hope you will. Mom. I folded the note slowly and tucked it into her envelope, then sealed it shut. Monica slid it back into the folder without a word. By evening, everything was prepped. Monica's team would deliver the envelopes at staggered intervals. Her intern Danny would handle the investors. Monica herself would speak with Nolan's father. And I would hand Tessa hers. Monica walked me to the elevator. You don't have to say anything dramatic, she said. Just hand her the envelope and walk away. The documents do all the speaking. I know. She paused. You don't need to brace for what happens after. You've already done the hard part, seeing the truth. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. Thank you for believing me, I said. Always. The doors closed. Back home, I changed into an old sweater and opened the windows wide. The early evening air drifted in with the scent of lilacs from the neighbor's yard. The light was gold and soft, casting long shadows across the floor. I made a cup of tea and took it outside to the wooden rocking chair I kept on the porch. It creaked slightly as I sat, and I pulled an old throw blanket across my lap. I watched the sun set behind the rooftops across the street. A child rode past on a scooter trailed by a golden retriever and a man shouting gently to slow down. Cars eased into driveways. Porch lights clicked on. I thought about the years I spent making things easier for everyone else. The meals I cooked with one hand while holding Tessa's homework in the other. The rent checks I mailed with borrowed money. The clothes I hemmed late at night so she would feel polished, seen. None of it had ever been about being thanked. But it had never been meant to be rewritten either. Tomorrow wouldn't be loud. There would be no confrontation. No shouting. There would only be a set of truths delivered quietly. Surgically. Like the final line of a poem landing where no one expected it but exactly where it needed to go. I closed my eyes. Let the evening air wash over me. Let the quiet take up space where the grief had been. Let tomorrow come. I was ready. The Whitaker estate looked even grander in the daylight. The white clapboard house stood tall at the top of the lawn, its columns draped in pale linen like it was waiting to host royalty. A long table stretched across the patio, already set with cut crystal silver-rimmed plates and towering vases of peonies. The scent of roasted meats and rosemary drifted through the late afternoon breeze. I arrived at precisely 2 o'clock. Not early. Not late. My dress was a soft slate gray simple and pressed with a neckline just high enough to say restraint and sleeves just short enough to whisper dignity. My shoes were flat polished. No jewelry except for the thin gold band I'd stopped wearing years ago but kept for occasions that required a reminder of what I had survived. The valet took my keys without looking at me. Evelyn met me near the entryway. Her smile was tight practiced and entirely without warmth. "Eleanor, lovely of you to make it." I offered a small nod. "Thank you for having me." She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about my drive. She turned instead, gesturing toward the back lawn where laughter floated like perfume. "Most of the guests have arrived. We'll begin with toast soon. Please help yourself to refreshments." I followed the curve of the stone path, taking in the faces as I passed. Some I recognized from photos. Nolan's business partners, Tessa's college friends, men in suits with two white teeth women, whose expressions tightened when they saw my department store clutch. Nolan stood near the grill, talking with his father Gregory. His eyes flicked up as I approached and his posture shifted slightly. Not alarmed, just alert. He raised his glass as I passed. "Glad you could make it, Eleanor." I smiled without stopping. Of course. Tessa was radiant as always. She wore a linen jumpsuit the color of bone with a narrow belt and sandals that probably cost more than the monthly lease on my apartment. Her hair curled loosely around her shoulders and every movement she made seemed choreographed. She didn't notice me at first. I found a seat near the edge of the lawn shaded by one of the pergolas. Monica's intern Danny walked past a few minutes later dressed in a pale green blouse and carrying a silver tray that didn't match the caterer's uniforms. I met her eyes. She gave a barely perceptible nod. It had begun. At 2:35 the first envelope was delivered. Gregory Whitaker received his beside the bar handed discreetly by one of Monica's clerks. He opened it lazily, then froze halfway through his cocktail sip. At 2:37, Evelyn was given hers on the patio by a man in a dark blazer and sunglasses. She blinked as she read the letterhead, her face tightening into a grim line. At 2:38, the two boutique investors flanking the buffet table were handed their copies. One of them, tall, salt and pepper hair navy vest, turned sheet after sheet in confusion before calling out to Nolan. And at 2:40, Nolan himself received his envelope from Danny. He opened it slowly with a polite nod, clearly assuming it was something ceremonial. Then his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough to make the blood drain from his face. That was when Tessa saw me. She crossed the lawn quickly, her heels barely touching the grass. Her smile was polite but strained. "Mom, did you bring something? What's going on?" "People are getting documents." I turned toward her and reached for the champagne flute on the nearby table. The light caught the glass just right. Pale gold. Steady. I raised it slightly and met her eyes. "You forgot one thing." Her brow creased. "What? You forgot who owns everything." I took a sip. The words didn't land immediately. Her confusion lingered even as Nolan's voice rose in alarm behind her. Gregory was now pointing at the paperwork, jabbing a finger into his son's chest. Evelyn stood by, pale and silent, clutching her envelope like it might explode. Tessa turned to look. Then the shouting began. Not loud, not wild, but sharp, fast-clipped. Gregory was demanding explanations. Nolan was scrambling to clarify. The two investors were huddled, phones out, searching company databases. Tessa turned back to me, her voice low and urgent. "Mom, what is this? What did you do?" "What I had to." She shook her head. "You don't understand. This is bad. Really bad." "Then you should sit down," I said quietly. "It's going to get worse before it gets better." Behind her, Monica was already speaking with one of the boutique vendors near the serving table, handing off a slim white envelope. The caterers began whispering. Someone dropped a glass. A server froze halfway to the kitchen. The illusion cracked. I stepped back, letting the chaos unfold without another word. Everything was in motion now. Every signature, every transfer, every omission, all being pulled into the light. And I didn't have to lift a finger. Gregory Whitaker held the packet with both hands like it might bite. He skimmed the first 2 pages, blinked once, then abruptly turned on his heel and marched toward the side garden where Nolan stood clutching his own envelope. Their voices weren't raised yet, but the tension between them crackled like a live wire. Within moments, they were nose to nose. "What the hell is this?" Gregory snapped, holding the legal notice up to his son's face. Nolan tried to answer, but the words faltered in his throat. He looked around like he expected someone to step in to rescue him with a better explanation than the one unraveling in his own head. Gregory wasn't interested in delay. "Did you funnel boutique money into South Bay? Are you insane? Do you have any idea how this looks?" "It was a temporary hold," Nolan said, palms up. "Just a bridge until we secured the other funding." "You never secured it." Gregory hissed, his voice low but venomous. "You moved shareholder money into a fund flagged by 2 federal agencies. This isn't just mismanagement, it's exposure. Criminal exposure." Nearby, the 2 investors who had received their envelopes were now pacing near the buffet table, whispering furiously into their phones. One of them, Ryan Lang, a known commodities trader, shouted to Nolan across the yard. "What the hell did you involve us in?" Nolan ignored him. Evelyn, in her ivory blouse and pearls, stood a few feet away, rigid as stone. She turned sharply toward Monica, who was speaking calmly with one of the guests near the koi pond. "You need to leave this property. Now." Monica didn't flinch. She simply handed the last envelope to a courier beside her, then turned toward Evelyn and replied clearly enough for nearby guests to hear. "I'm here by legal authority, Mrs. Whitaker. Any attempt to interfere will be considered obstruction. I suggest you speak with your counsel." Evelyn's face paled. The buzz across the backyard was rising now. People stepping away from conversations, glancing at phones, murmuring. Several guests were already leaving early, slipping their heels off as they made quiet exits down the side path toward the valet station. Then I saw her. Tessa was standing at the edge of the lawn, shoulders tense, her eyes locked on me like I was the only stable thing in a room, tilting sideways. She walked slowly at first, then faster, as the distance closed. I stayed where I was, hands relaxed at my sides, heart steady. When she reached me, her voice was brittle. "What did you do?" I waited. "Is this about the wedding?" "About the money." Still, I said nothing. She took a sharp breath. "Do you want me to beg? Is that what this is?" I looked at her. Really looked. The woman in front of me wore designer sandals and a tailored jumpsuit. Her hair curled perfectly at her collarbone, her nails were manicured in a shade of pearl. But behind her eyes I saw something crumbling. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Her voice cracked at the end. I studied her face. "I used to want you to be happy," I said. She blinked, confused. "Now I just want you to see yourself." That stunned her into silence. Behind her, Nolan's argument with his father had escalated into chest puffing and hand gestures. One of the boutique investors threw his envelope to the ground and stormed off, muttering something about pulling out before the press got wind. A young woman with a clipboard was crying near the bar. But for a moment the chaos faded. It was just us. Tessa's lip trembled. "Mom, I didn't know it was like this." "Yes. You did." She shook her head slowly, but it wasn't denial. It was dawning. And it was breaking her open in real time. "You think I don't love you," she whispered. "I think you love yourself more." That landed. She looked down at her shoes, then up at me again, eyes rimmed red. "I built something. I thought if I could just keep control. I thought I had to make it perfect." "Perfection doesn't survive truth," I said. Silence again. Then, finally quietly, she asked, "What happens now?" "That depends on you." She looked over her shoulder toward Nolan. He was alone now, jaw clenched, watching her. Gregory had disappeared inside. Evelyn was nowhere to be seen. When she turned back to me, her voice was small. "I don't know how to fix this." I didn't answer. Because it wasn't mine to fix anymore. She knew it. And that was the beginning. Under the strings of backyard lights, the evening air shifted from warm hospitality to a tense chill. It started with Monica unfolding the audit packet at the center of the patio, the sound of paper sharp against the low hum of conversation. She didn't raise her voice, but everyone heard her. The words carried farther than music or toasts ever could. In accordance with the authority granted to my client Eleanor Maddox as majority shareholder effective immediately all accounts and operational access tied to Maddox and Company are frozen pending legal review and audit investigation. The buzz stopped. Forks clinked. Someone coughed. Evelyn blinked hard, her manicured fingers tightening around the stem of her wine glass. "Excuse me," she said, though it sounded more like a threat than a question. Gregory had already read his entire envelope. He didn't say anything right away, but his face had gone pale, and when he turned toward Nolan, the tension in his jaw was visible even from across the lawn. Nolan tried to keep calm. He squared his shoulders and forced a smile. "This is obviously a misunderstanding. I'm sure Eleanor's just concerned about accounting errors. We'll clarify things privately." "You'll clarify them now," Gregory said, stepping forward. "Did you or did you not use boutique funds to cover your failed real estate project?" Nolan's smile faded. "It wasn't failed, it's in transition." "That's not what this says," Gregory snapped, holding up the documents. "Boutique assets rerouted through a shell vendor into South Bay Holdings. A shell your name is tied to. That's temporary." "I told Tessa, you told no one," Gregory interrupted. "You used someone else's business like a checkbook. That's not strategy. That's recklessness." Nolan looked to Evelyn for support, but she was staring down at her envelope, rereading the same line over and over. Gregory didn't stop. "You've endangered investors. You've exposed the family name to legal liability. And worst of all, you dragged Eleanor's sacrifice through the mud." Tessa stepped forward. "Dad, stop." Gregory turned to her, not unkindly. "I warned you when you came to us for help. I told you that control has consequences." She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Evelyn finally found her voice. "We can't have this discussion here. This is a family gathering. There are guests. There were guests. Most of them have left." She glanced around. It was true. The music had stopped, the laughter had died. The caterers stood awkwardly at their stations, unsure whether to serve dessert or run. Gregory lowered his voice, but his words were no less final. "You're out, Nolan. As of tonight, you no longer hold any advisory title with Whitaker Holdings. You'll remove yourself from the trust. From the board. From my house." Evelyn gasped. "Gregory." He looked at her. He had his chance. Nolan stood frozen, still holding his glass like a man trying to act normal during an earthquake. Then he dropped it. The shatter was louder than the music had ever been. He turned and walked toward the house, not looking back. Tessa stared after him, motionless. Then, she turned to me. Her steps were unsteady, her hands shook. Her voice came out in a whisper barely audible above the crickets and the murmurs around us. "Did you want to ruin me?" I looked at her. Not as the mother who used to pack her lunch or the woman who signed over her retirement savings, but as someone who had finally chosen the truth over illusion. "I wanted to save you." She swallowed hard. "From what?" "From the fantasy that you could build a life on a mission and think it would hold." Tears brimmed in her eyes. "I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I was protecting what we built. You rewrote it. And you forgot the cost." She looked down. "I thought you'd always stay quiet." "I know. I thought if I just kept moving, kept building, you wouldn't notice." "I noticed." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Is there any way back from this?" "That's not a question for me." She nodded slowly, then looked out toward the field where dusk was giving way to full darkness. The lanterns lining the hedges flickered. Guests were leaving in clusters now, shoes in hand, eyes averted. Some glanced at her. No one approached. For the first time in her life, my daughter looked truly alone. She didn't try to explain herself again. She didn't beg. She stood quietly in the grass, hair tousled by the wind, arms crossed over her chest like she was holding herself together. And for the first time, I saw something resembling honesty settle in her posture. Not resolution, but maybe remorse. Maybe the beginning of something real. I returned to Newton late that night, long after the last of the guests had scattered and the embers from the barbecue had cooled. The quiet inside my apartment felt heavier than usual, like it had been waiting for me to come back and finally notice it. I kicked off my shoes, hung my bag on the hook by the door, and stood still for a moment, letting the silence settle around me like a blanket. I didn't cry. Instead, I went to the spare bedroom, the one that had mostly become a storage room over the years. I switched on the lamp, revealing stacked boxes, an old sewing machine covered with a towel, and a closet door I hadn't opened in a very long time. It took me nearly an hour to clear the space. I moved slowly, carefully, as if the dust held memories too fragile to disturb. I vacuumed the corners, wiped down the windowsill, folded the unused bedding. Then I opened the closet and pulled down the box marked Simply Designs. It had been taped shut for over a decade. Inside were sketches, swatches, old photographs I had torn from catalogs for inspiration. Clippings from articles about women over 50 embracing new phases of life, of style, of ownership. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue, was the mock sign I had once drawn on a whim during a quiet evening after Tessa's bedtime. Ellie's studio where style begins at 50. I smiled despite myself. Back then, it had felt like a dream I had no right to pursue. Too much to manage, too late to start, too risky with a child to raise. So, I folded it away and chose the path of necessity instead. I ran my fingertips along the edges of a sketchbook filled with jacket designs, blouses with hidden seams, pants with real pockets. Things I wished had existed when I was younger, when money was tight and dignity often meant sacrifice. Now those dreams didn't feel impossible. Just waiting. The next morning, Monica called. I let it go to voicemail but listened to her message while sitting on the edge of my bed, coffee in hand. Hi, Eleanor. Just an update on the boutique situation. Based on the audit findings and pending civil action, operations are officially suspended for at least 12 months. Possibly longer depending on court movement. Also, investor withdrawal has frozen credit lines. I'm sorry. I know it's not the resolution we hoped for, but it is a reset. Call me when you're ready. I didn't call her back. Not yet. Instead, I went to the kitchen, opened the drawer where I kept a bundle of birthday cards, and found the one from Tessa's 12th birthday. It was hand-drawn in markers, a lopsided heart on the front, and inside, in shaky cursive, the words, "I'll always be your biggest fan." That little girl was still somewhere in the woman I saw yesterday. But I wasn't going to look for her anymore. Around noon, my phone vibrated. A text from Tessa. "Mom, can we talk? Just us. No lawyers. I need to understand." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I pressed the side button and let it go dark. It wasn't punishment. It was pause. I had spent so many years answering every need, every apology, every unspoken demand, afraid that not responding would make me unloving. But silence could be love too. Boundaries were another kind of care. That evening, I pulled a folding table into the spare room. I unwrapped my sewing machine, plugged it in, and ran my hand across its surface. The hum of the motor when I tested the pedal sent a strange calm through my chest. I placed the design binder in the center of the table and opened to a page marked Spring. It wasn't about competing with what I had built with Tessa. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about reclaiming the part of me that had learned how to create long before anyone else gave me permission. The next day, I took a walk through the neighborhood. I passed the bakery that had opened on the corner, a consignment shop with a for-lease sign in the window, and a small studio space tucked behind a yoga center that caught my eye. Sunlight pooled across its front step, lighting up the dust inside the glass. A quiet little place with just enough room for a few racks, a work table, and a chair for conversation. I didn't call the realtor that day, but I wrote down the number. Later that evening, I sat in my kitchen, the last of the day's light spilling across the floor, catching the edges of the tile and the small jade plant by the window. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about what came next. I wasn't calculating. I wasn't waiting for someone else's permission or approval. I wasn't angry, or hurt, or hollow. I was quiet, steady, and entirely my own. 3 months later, I stood in front of a small storefront nestled on a quiet street in Brattleboro, Vermont, holding a cup of hot cider and watching the early autumn sun stretch across the sidewalk. The windows were clean and framed with fresh pine trim. Inside, the space smelled of cedarwood, fabric starch, and faint lavender from the sachets tucked into every drawer. Everything inside had been touched by my hands. I had painted the walls a soft cream. I had restored the counters with lemon oil and sandpaper. I had chosen every hanger and folded each linen blouse with care. Above the door, the new wooden sign had just been hung. Substance over status. It was more than a name. It was a declaration. A place for women who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. A place for the forgotten, the overlooked, the overworked. Women who had long since traded sparkle for strength. A few locals had already begun stopping in. A postmistress from across the street. A retired teacher named Grace who had walked with a cane and cried when she found a coat that fit her shoulders just right. A woman who had raised 4 children and told me she hadn't bought anything new for herself in 8 years. They didn't want perfection. They wanted presence. Fabric that breathed, sleeves that didn't pinch, hems that didn't assume you were 25 and chasing the city skyline. I kept a small bell on the counter, a cracked ceramic piece shaped like a daisy. When the door opened, it gave off a soft ring that reminded me of Tessa's giggle when she was 5. I hadn't seen her since that day on the lawn. But 2 weeks ago, I received a card in the mail, no return address. Just a note inside written in her handwriting. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't know how far I had drifted. I hope you're okay. I'm trying." She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't offer excuses. She was just reaching. Carefully. I hadn't written back yet. Forgiveness takes time, so does truth. I had spoken to Monica just last week. The boutique in Boston was officially closed pending court proceedings. The audit revealed enough financial mismanagement that lawsuits would likely follow. But the civil action had protected my stake. No one could take that from me again. Tessa had voluntarily stepped away from the brand before it all collapsed. From what I heard, she was staying in New Hampshire with a cousin while she figured out her next steps. I wished her well. Truly. But I was no longer tethered to her choices. Inside the shop, the morning light poured across the wide floorboards, casting long golden shadows that stretched like memories. I flipped the sign to open and took a deep breath as the bell above the door rang softly. A woman in her 60s stepped inside. She wore a worn denim jacket and carried a canvas tote with a faded sunflower print. She walked slowly, touching the fabric of a navy wrap dress with gentle fingers. "This place is beautiful," she said. "Whose is it?" "Mine," I said with a quiet smile. She looked around again. "You design all this?" "Yes. I used to do it for someone else. Now I do it for women like us." She gave a soft laugh. "Finally. A place where I don't feel like I need permission to exist." "You never did," I said. She left with 2 dresses and a cardigan that made her eyes light up. Around noon, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in the armchair by the window. The breeze carried the smell of dry leaves and early chimney smoke. Outside, a mother and daughter passed by holding hands. The girl skipped. The woman laughed. I watched them for a while. There were things I might never get back. Years of silence. The ache of realizing how much I'd let slide in the name of peace. But there were things I had now that I'd never had before. A room that smelled like lavender. A name above the door. A voice that no longer shook. At the end of the day, I turned off the lights, swept the floor, and locked the door behind me. I lingered for a moment, looking back through the glass. The shop was quiet. Still. And entirely mine. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, a neighbor walking her dog passed by. "That's your store, right?" she asked, pausing with a smile. "Yes. I love the name." "What does it mean to you?" I looked at the sign, then at her. "It means I don't need permission to begin again." She nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. If Eleanor's journey reminded you of someone you know, or maybe even yourself, leave a comment. What's the moment when silence stops being strength and becomes surrender? What would it take for you to reclaim your story? If you felt something in this story, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the quietest revolutions start with a single whisper, "I own this now."